Good evening, sir. Today's topic for discussion is uretropelvic junction obstruction, diagnosis and management. Myself, Dr. Vinay. Moderator is Dr. Deepak, sir. Hydronephrosis is a most common renal abnormality seen in prenatal ultrasonogram in around 1 in 100 to 500 pregnancies. The careful follow-up to decide observation or versus surgery is very important. When there is an unnecessary intervention may lead to morbidity to the infant, and when there is an unnecessary observation is done, then there are chances of risk of infection and renal parenchymal loss. So the differential diagnosis for pediatric hydronephrosis are the obstructive causes are like PUJO, VUJO, ectopic ureters, uretroceles, posterior and anterior urethral walls, urethral atresia and congenital urethral stricture.
We are not using abbreviations. Restrictive and abbreviation must be considered exception. As a policy, always use full names.
Yes.
Except which is observably stopped.
And non-obstructive causes like vesico-ureteric reflux, primary non-obstructive megaureter, megacalicosis, and fetal folds, neurogenic bladder, and conditions which mimic hydronephrosis are like extrarenal pelvis, multicystic dysplastic kidney, peripelvic cysts, and neonatal kidneys, where these pyramids shows and hypoechoic, they are seen hypoechoic, which are seen like a hydronephrosis. So the prenatally detected uropathies, this uretropelvic junction obstruction are most common, which comprises about 50% of the cases. The most urologists, they initially follow conservatively when there is a decreasing differential renal function, or when there is a worsening hydronephrosis. So then they indicate for the surgery. We have to evaluate, provide either anatomical or functional information regarding the hydronephrosis. Then we have to go ahead with the management. There is no gold standard study for the evaluation of the renal obstructive disorders. There is always a risk for progressive damage and loss of renal function. So sequential radiographic studies is advised. So coming to investigations, the first important investigation in hydronephrosis evaluation is renal ultrasound. It is a non-invasive and it is inexpensive, portable, which causes no ionizing radiation or contrast media. It is not limited by renal failure. It is most commonly used for screening of renal conditions, and when after diagnosis used for follow-up. There are nomographic charts according to age and weight. So we can compare these renal lengths and renal size with the nomographic charts. So in hydronephrosis, there will be hyperechoic central renal sinus with anechoic branching structures with dilated chelicis, which is a which shows hydronephrosis. So there are different grading systems. The most commonly used grading system for hydronephrosis is the Society of Fetal Urology, that is SFU grading. That is it is for both antenatal and postnatal gradings. For antenatal hydronephrosis grading, in the second trimester, it is divided into mild, moderate, and severe hydronephrosis. That is 4 to 7, 7 to 10, and more than 10 millimeter. For third trimester, it is 7 to 9, 9 to 15, and more than 15 for mild, moderate, and severe hydronephrosis. These, in case of around 5% of the mild hydronephrosis cases present with UPGO in postnatal cases, around 17% develop PUJO in moderate cases, and around 54% of the cases develop PUJO in case of severe hydronephrosis, which are diagnosed antenatally. Postnatally, the hydronephrosis gradings are 0 to 4, where 0 is normal, in grade 1 is no splitting, or the pelvis is visualized, renal pelvis is visualized, you can see here in the picture. In grade 2 there will be further dilatation of the pelvis with dilatation of the single or few calyces, and in grade 3 there will be dilated pelvis along with calyceal dilatation with normal parenchyma. In grade 4 there will be dilated pelvis along with the dilated calyces with thinned out parenchyma. So the limitation of ultrasound is it won't give this functional information, and it is not reliable in predicting the obstruction. It will give you only the anatomical nature of the kidneys. There are high chances of false positive cases. False positive when there is an extrarenal pelvis, or then there is a peripelvic cyst, when there is a dilatation because of the vesicuritic reflex or pyelonephritis, when there is a USG is performing in a fetal or neonatal kidneys where these medulla and pyramids look like they are hypoechoic and they look like a hydronephrosis. The false negative results can occur in oliguric states. So to decrease this, there are few other techniques in ultrasonography like Doppler ultrasonography with resistive index. When there is a obstruction, it will cause the increase in the arterial resistance with relative decrease in the diastolic flow. So which is the predictive of obstruction. The resistive index is calculated by peak systolic velocity minus minimal diastolic velocity divided by peak systolic velocity. So the criteria to say it is there is a obstruction is when there is a resistive index is more than 0.7, or interrenal resistive index is more than 0.06 to 0.1 when there is a unilateral dilatation, and the abnormal resistive index responds to diuretic challenge. But only later to like interrenal resistive index and abnormal resistive index in response to diuretic challenge are more appropriate, because in infants and neonates the normal resistive index is around 0.7 to 1, which comes to the adult range by 2 to 4 years. So other techniques which are used to predict the uh, obstruction is longitudinal parenchymal length divided by pelvic calyceal length. When the ratio is less than 1.6, then we can predict the obstruction. Coming to diuretic renal scintigraphy, this topic is detailed in previous class by Dr. Setu. Here the radiopharmaceuticals are used like radionuclide technetium 99 along with macromolecules. It mainly depends on the macromolecule function which are injected intravenously. So the most common macromolecules which are used are mercaptoacetyl triglycine or diethylene triamine pentaestic acid, that is DTPA, or ethylene cysteine, and DMSA, that is mercaptosuccinic acid. So for renography, most commonly used these macromolecules that isotopes are MAC3, DTPA, or EC. The EC has more extraction, renal extraction compared to MAC3. That is, EC has more extraction around 60 to 70% compared to MAC3. That is around 30 to 40%. So EC scan is more preferred over MAC3. So the basic principles of diuretic scintigraphy is these isotopes are injected intravenously, and the renal parenchymal uptake is taken at 60 seconds, and the radionuclide emits gamma radiation after uptake, and which is detected by gamma counter. The radiation that emitted is quantified with the computer assisted digital processing, and these radiations are represented morphologically and graphically as a scan. When there is no obstruction, more than 50% of the radionucleotide is cleared from the renal pelvis. So within 10 to 15 minutes. So that is taken as T half. When the T half is more than 20 minutes, then it is considered as obstruction. When the T half is between 15 to 20 minutes, it is considered as indeterminate. So the indication for surgery based on the scintigraphy are the renal function less than 35 to 40%, T half more than 20 minutes, and ultrasonography showing the anatomical obstruction. But the disadvantages of scintigraphy are it is poor in anatomical resolution, long examination times. In around 15% of the times, it shows false negative or false positive obstruction. In case of bilateral diseases, where there is a bilateral obstruction, we take the proper function of the each kidney cannot be measured, and it also depends on the interpretation of the radiologist. Coming to one more important investigation is magnetic resonance imaging. The advantages of MRU is it's a multiplanar capabilities and possibility for the 3D reconstruction, and it gives a excellent anatomical resolution with soft tissue contrast, and there is no exposure of ionizing radiation. Along with MRU, when it is the contrast is when there is a contrast enhancement with gadolinium with DTPA, it gives the excellent anatomical resolution along with the function of the kidneys. It gives more morphological detail along with the functional information, which is superior to diuretic scintigraphy. This MRU along with contrast enhanced MRU can also be can also be used in case of bilateral disease or with the solitary disease. It can give GFR for the bilateral disease or single solitary kidneys also. Usually this gadolinium is not nephrotoxic, but when there is a severe renal problems are there, in around 5% of the cases, there are chances of nephrogenic systemic fibrosis will be there. So we have to use cautiously. The technique is the T1 and T2 weighted images are taken, followed by contrast enhancement imaging are taken of the entire urinary tract. So in contrast enhanced, there are three phases. In first phase, there will be renal cortical enhancement, which differentiates from the medulla. In second phase, the medulla enhances more compared to the cortex. And in third phase, there will be excretion, the excretion of the contrast into the collecting system and to the ureter. So when there is obstruction, the morphologically there will be dilatation of the pelvis along with the narrowing of the ureter is seen, and functionally there will be reduced enhancement of kidney along with delayed excretion into the collecting system and ureter, and there will be swelling of the contrast and fluid levels are seen within the renal pelvis. Coming to renal transit time, it is the time taken by the contrast to enter from kidney to the ureter, that is below the pelviureteric junction. The normal renal transit time is less than 4 minutes, and if it is more than 8 minutes, it is considered as obstructed. It is falsely prolonged in case of enlarged collecting systems. So to prevent this, they calculate this calyceal transit time, that is the time taken for the contrast to enter from cortex to the calycis, which eliminates the effect of large redundant collecting system. So when there is a short or symmetric calyceal transit time, it highly suggestive of non-obstructed system. So the indication of surgery based on MRU is the renal function less than 35 to 40%, renal transit time more than 8 minutes, or when there is a prolonged corticomedullary crossover time, or decreasing GFR and anatomical findings showing obstruction. But the limitations of MRU is For the infants and children require sedation, the availability, cost of the MRU, and the standardized equation which are used in MRU for the calculation of the function and drainage are not accepted universally. There are other few more investigations which are not used routinely nowadays, like intravenous urography. It was historically a radiographic modality of choice for non-invasive assessment of the urinary tract, which gave the anatomical accuracy, renal function along with the uh, obstruction pattern. But gives a good anatomical function when there is a function of the kidney is good, but it gives a inaccurate when there is a poor function. And we inject a nephrotoxic contracts, and there will be chances of and there is a radiation exposure chance will be also there. So nowadays it is replaced by ultrasonogram, scintigraphy, or MRU. Coming to MCU, voiding cystourethropy, approximately 9 to 14% of the cases with PUJO have vesicuretic reflux. So the MCU is limited to the patients who is having dilated ureters on ultrasonogram, or patients with febrile UTI, and when there is a bilateral uh, obstruction. So the UPGO with low grade VUR, there is a spontaneous resolution after pyeloplasty is seen. Coming to pressure flow study, that is Whitaker test, it detects the resistance of ureter to a known flow rate simultaneously by measuring the manometric pressures between the renal pelvis and the bladder. But it is unaffected by GFR and good anatomy of the, it gives a good anatomy of the obstruction. Nowadays, it is rarely performed and useful only when there is a equivocal studies regarding the obstruction. It is done by using either normal saline or the contrast. And there are two manometers are used, one in the pelvis, one in the bladder. The saline is injected at a rate of 10 ml per minute, and the differential pressure between the pelvis and the bladder is measured. When it is less than 13 centimeter of water, it is considered as normal. If it is between 14 to 20, it is considered as mild obstruction. When it is more than 35 centimeter of water, then it is considered as severe obstruction. The limitations for these pressure studies are it requires general anesthesia and it is a invasive procedure, but it won't give any functional information, and chances of radiation exposure is more. So coming to biochemical markers, in case of hydronephrosis, there is a persistently elevated collecting system pressure. So there will be renal abnormalities like increased tubular pressure, decreased blood flow, and decreased GFR, and renal tubular dysfunction. So there are few biomarkers which are elevated in case of hydronephrosis, which are the transforming growth factor or monocyte chemotactic protein 1 or endothelin 1, and the other factors like urinary epidermal growth factors are decreased in case of hydronephrosis. These biochemical markers are not used commonly. Coming to preoperative vascular imaging, it is important in case of hydronephrosis when presented in older children or in adults. So the incidence of crossing vessels are seen in around 11 to 79% of the cases. They exacerbate the obstruction rather than initiating the obstructive processes. So the imaging modalities which are used are the distal subtraction angiography, helical CT, or contrast enhanced color Doppler, endoluminal sonography, or MR angiography. Coming to management, around 50 to 80% of the hydronephrosis which are diagnosed prenatally resolve spontaneously. They do not require any type of intervention. Only regular follow-up is needed in such cases. But others, they develop progressive hydronephrosis with diminution of the function in follow-up of 3 years. So the management uh, requires are the watchful waiting or early intervention. The objective of management is to relieve the obstruction and to preserve or improve the overall renal function, to maintain the normal development and lessen the morbidity, but not compromising the surgical outcome. When the differential function between the two kidneys is less than 10% with uh, hydronephrosis, the most common procedure is done pyeloplasty. It again depends on the surgeon's preference and institutional protocols. Few institutions directly go ahead with pyeloplasty, like in our institute, or versus initially they go ahead with temporary nephrostomy or DJ stenting. When there is an improvement in the function, then they go ahead with pyeloplasty. Coming to renal biopsies, the renal biopsy before surgery, they identify the glomerulosclerosis, which shows the post-pyeloplasty prognosis, but not done routinely. There are no tests which are reliable to predict the renal recoverability. Coming to watchful waiting, in case of unilateral uretropelvic junction obstruction, sequential radiographic studies are done. The postnatal ultrasonography is done at 3 to 7 days or just before discharge. There will be relative dehydration of the fetus and there will be physiological oliguria in first 2 days. So there are high chances of false negative results when you do immediately. But the exception to this is when there is a male patient with antenatal detected bilateral hydronephrosis with thickened bladder with oligohydramnios. When you are suspecting bladder outlet obstruction like posterior urethral wall, then you have to go ahead with postnatal USG within 24 to 48 hours. So the flow chart postnatally, how you have to go ahead with this. In case of unilateral hydronephrosis, postnatal USG is done at 2 to 5 days. If it is normal, then go ahead with sequential USG at 2 to 4 weeks. 4 to 8 weeks. If it is showing low grade hydronephrosis, then sequential monitoring is done. If it is showing moderate hydronephrosis, and again follow up at 3 to 6 months. When there is a decreasing size of the APD, then you have to monitor with sequential ultrasonography. When there is a bilateral hydronephrosis with severe hydronephrosis, like SFU grade 3 and 4 with a male patient, we have to go ahead with MCU suspecting PUV. If there is a PUV, and treatment of the PUV accordingly is done. If there is no PUV, posterior urethral wall, then repeat ultrasonography is done at 4 to 8 weeks. Even at 4 to 8 weeks, it is showing increasing the APD diameter, then we have to go ahead with diuretic scintigraphy to see for the renal function, and if there is obstruction, go ahead with surgery. So the surgical options are the open surgeries, laparoscopic endopilotomy, or robot assisted laparoscopic surgery. The incisions usually taken are transperitoneal, flank, anterior subcostal or posterior lumbotomy incisions. The techniques used usually are non-dismembered pyeloplasty or dismembered pyeloplasty. Coming to different approaches, the anterior extraperitoneal approach, patient is put in a supine position or with a modified flank position, that is 15 to 20 degrees elevated on the affected side, followed by subcostal incision uh, from edge of the rectus muscle to the just below the tip of the rib. It again depends on the surgeon. Few surgeons, they take the incision from the 12th rib to the line of umbilicus around 4 to 5 centimeter, or transverse incisions, followed by muscle cutting or muscle splitting. Again, it depends on the surgeon. We have to take care of the neurovascular bundle which are situated between the internal oblique and transversalis. And once you expose the peritoneum, sweep the peritoneum medially and expose the gyrotous fascia. and after this the gyrotous fascia is cut longitudinally, that is vertical to the patient, and after this when you expose the kidney, lateral traction is given to expose the renal pelvis. In the lumbotomy approach, the incisions are either transverse subcostal or vertical paraspinal incisions as shown in picture. The vertical, after the skin incision, the lumbodorsal fascia is cut vertically, and it is a relatively short distance for the pyeloplasty, which gives direct access to the pelvis. But before starting the procedure, you should have definite anatomical orientation, but because it gives limited exposure, especially to the distal ureter. This lumbotomy approach is contraindicated in case of anomaly of the positions like anterior pelvis, and it is difficult when there is a intrarenal pelvis or in muscular patients who have the steep angle between the spine and the 12th rib. When you expose, when there is a difficulty, the 12th rib is disarticulated and rotated cranially for more exposure. Coming to one more exposure, that is flank approach. The patient is put in a flank position and table is flexed with a kidney rest. The incision is given anterior to the tip of 12th rib or supracostal 12th rib incision. Muscles are cut or retracted and peritoneum retracted as previously told. In anterior transperitoneal approach, which are commonly done for redo pyeloplasties, or when there is a access to the abdominal contents are required, or the access to the opposite kidney is required. So in this anterior transperitoneal approach, the colon is reflected or transmesenteric approach is done. The anatomy is identified clearly in this approach, and damage to the ureter, pelvis or renal vessels are avoided by direct visualization in case of scarred retroperitoneum. Coming to surgical techniques, there are different surgical techniques like dismembered pyeloplasty. It is most commonly done, that is Anderson-Heinz pyeloplasty. The flap techniques like YV plasty, spiral flap techniques, vertical flap techniques are used in case of long and narrowed segment where the pelvis is used to augment the uretropelvic junction, and other techniques like incisional intubated types, which are not used nowadays, where the incision was given through the strictured area and healing was occurred over the stent. This technique is not used nowadays. Coming to dismembered pyeloplasty, the approach is born out of a necessity for the treatment of retrocaval ureter repair. There was an initial reluctance to do this dismembered pyeloplasty because they thought that by injuring the nerve there will be difficulty to empty into from pelvis into the ureter, but studies have shown the reconstructed pelvis empties well from pelvis to the ureter. So even in case of aberrant lower pole vessels, the dismembered pyeloplasty is the treatment of choice. So in case of Anderson-Heinz dismembered pyeloplasty, after either flank approach or after exposure, the pelvis is mobilized and ureter is transected at uretropelvic junction, and ureter is spatulated laterally till the normal caliber of the ureter is seen. After that, if there is a too much of redundant pelvis is seen, the reduction of the pelvis is done, and the anastomosis is started from the most dependent area. The first stitch is apex stitch taken at lower part of the ureter to the lower part of the pelvis, and the followed by posterior layer is sutured or continuously, or few surgeons take intermittent sutures also, followed by degestant insertion and closure by closure of the anterior layer. The anastomosis is done by taking adventitia and less of the mucosa. The routine dismembered pyeloplasty is done with minimal handling, may not warrant placement of the double J stent or nephrostomy. The double J stent, which helps in the urinary diversion and it maintains the ureteral caliber, and also it helps in the maintaining anastomotic alignment. When you do the RGP preoperatively, which is showing beaded ureter, showing peristaltic abnormalities, or when there is an immature proximal ureter, which may benefit from internal stenting. But again, the double J stenting again depends on the surgeon. The nephrostomy is useful when in case of after pyeloplasty in case of solitary or poorly functioning kidneys, or in case of small infants where the ureter caliber is small and delicate ureter. This nephrostomy tube, it prevents high renal pelvic pressures when there is a transient edema at the anastomotic site, and it also gives access for the radiographic studies before its removal for free transit of the contrast into the ureter. Post pyeloplasty drains are also kept near the anastomotic site. Even post operatively, if there is a leak, it prevents urinoma formation. Coming to flap techniques, Foley's YV-plasty, it is commonly done in high ureteral insertion when the PUJ obstruction is more than 1.5 to 2 centimeter. But when there is a large redundant pelvis is there, there will be fixed kink, which gives again persistence of the obstruction. And this cannot be done in case of crossing vessels. Coming to spiral flap repair, uh, when there is the pelvis is not much larger, the flap is created from the renal pelvis, and it can bridge a gap of several centimeters, and they say it is around 2 to 3 centimeters gap can be bridged with spiral flap repair. Coming to vertical flap repair, that is Cardino and Prince vertical flap repair, it is designed when the dependent uretropelvic section is with a large square shaped extrarenal pelvis, where the flap is raised from the pelvis and uh, taken over the obstructed part and anastomosed to the after cutting the ureter. This also can bridge a gap of 2 to 3 centimeter. Coming to laparoscopic pyeloplasty, uh, the laparoscopic pyeloplasty, there is excellent visualization will be there, and chances of injury to the other structures are also less, and chances of visualization of the other kidney will also be there. So here in laparoscopic technique, we use either transperitoneal or retroperitoneal approach. After decompression of the bladder, umbilical camera port and two working ports are inserted. In transperitoneal approach, we can go ahead with transmesenteric approach or colonic mobilization. The transmesenteric approach is done in most of the times of left side and sometimes on the right side. After when there is a distended pelvis which is seen bulging through the mesenteric veil of lateral colon, which avoids the mobilization of the colon. In colonic mobilization, which is done most commonly on the right side, or when there is a fatty mesentery on when there is a renal anatomy is distorted. After pelvis is mobilized, the pelvis is hitched to the anterior abdominal wall, and in some cases, in some surgeons, they hitch ureter also to the anterior abdominal wall, and standard Anderson-Heinz dismembered pyeloplasty is done. In case of laparoscopic retroperitoneal approach, 3 trocar cameras are used, one at the 12th tip of the 12th rib, and the 2 working ports at the costovertebral and top of iliac crest as shown in the picture. The narrow retractors are used for a deep dissection. Gyrotous fascia is approached by blunt dissection, which is opened, and the working space is created by either by gas inflection or balloon insufflation, and these strokers are fixed, and pyeloplasty is done. Coming to robotic assisted laparoscopic pyeloplasty, the system used is Da Vinci, which gives more magnification with the 3D vision, with good articulation of the endorist, with tremor filtering and ergonomic surgeon's position will be there. The limitation of robotic assisted pyeloplasty is the large size of the robot compared to the size of the baby, which there is a limiting of the limitation of the anesthetic access, and there is an inadequate size of the operative field because of the size of the abdomen of the neonates. Coming to other techniques like ureterocalycostomy, the indications are the redo surgeries where the scarred area is there, so where we cannot do proper pyeloplasty, or intrarenal pelvis and long segment pelvic ureteric junction obstruction. So the procedure is amputation of the lower pole of the ureter is kidney is done, followed by when there is a large dependent lower calyx which is anastomosed to the proximal ureter, followed by the renal capsule or omentum or perinephric fat is covered over the anastomosis. Coming to a few other techniques which are not used routinely in case of pediatrics but more commonly used in adults, endopylotomy, which is done and either antegrade or retrograde approach. The procedure is followed by fluoroscopy is done and guide wire is passed across the UPJ, and cutting balloon is passed through the over the guide wire, and it is kept at the UPJ. After once you confirming the balloon is at the pelvic junction, the balloon is inflated and the blade is used to cut the pelvic junction obstruction. And one more technique is ureteroscopic guided endopylotomy using holmium laser, and followed by DJ stent insertion is done. The success rate in pediatric cases is around initial success is around 70 to 88%, but the long term success is around 65%. Sir, meeting will end in 5 minutes. If it ends, we'll rejoin again, sir. The failure rates is high in case of when there is a high grade of hydronephrosis with impaired function, or when there is a crossing vessels. The secondary endopylotomy after failed primary endopylotomy, the success rate is around 94%. Coming to one more new technique, that is laparosendoscopic single site surgery, where around 10 to 15 millimeter transumbilical incision is given, followed by commercially available products which are used, which can accommodate around 3 to 4 laparoscopic instruments. This use in pediatric cases is limited. Only nephrectomy and pyeloplasties are done in pediatric cases. The difficulties encountered in this surgeries are it is skill based on the skill of the surgeon, and there is a lack of the triangulation, and the most all these instruments are kept parallel to each other and they are in close proximity. Coming to treatment of uretropelvic junction obstruction in case of duplex kidneys. Duplex, in case of duplex kidney, it can occur either in upper moiety or in lower moiety. Because the lower moiety is dominant, it is most common in lower moiety duplex system. In case of incomplete bifid ureter, where there is a long lower pole ureter, the standard dismembered pyeloplasty is done. But in case of high bifurcation of the ureter, where the above the obstruction, below the obstruction we don't get adequate ureter for the pyeloplasty, then we can go ahead with ureter is distal ureter of the upper moiety is anastomosed to the pelvis. Coming to treatment of bilateral severe uretropelvic junction obstruction, that is SFU grade 3 or 4, there is no clear-cut recommendation for the bilateral obstruction. Postnatally, when you suspect a bilateral obstruction, we have to go ahead with MCU to rule out VUR, followed by sequential pyeloplasties are done. The sequential pyeloplasties are done based on the renal unit with higher SFU grade, or when there is a SFU grade is same, then we have to go ahead with higher SFU grade with lower renal function. When there is a significantly lower renal function, that is the difference between the two kidneys is more than 10, then we have to go ahead with nephrostomy of the worse functioning kidney and pyeloplasty of the better functioning kidney to prevent the more injury to the better functioning kidney, followed by the surgery to the contralateral side after usually done after 1 month. In our setup, you are doing usually after 2 to 3 months. So in case of severe uretropelvic junction obstruction, early surgery is advised. It is done usually within first year of life. So if it is done within first year, there are studies which shows rapid improvement in renal function compared to older children. So when there is a SFU grade 3 or 4 on one side and SFU grade 1 on one side, post pyeloplasty, the resolution of this hydronephrosis is seen on other side when there is a grade 1 SFU. When there is a grade 2 to 3 SFU on contralateral side, the improvement in function seen in other opposite side. So we have to monitor with serial ultrasonography. Coming to uretropelvic junction in horseshoe kidney, the management, this horseshoe kidney is a fusion anomaly with the renal malrotation with the variable blood supply. So in around 1/3 of the cases of horseshoe kidney, there will be obstruction will be seen. The pelvis and ureter are situated anteriorly. So the obstruction coming to management of PUJ in horseshoe kidney. PUJ is a fusion anomaly with renal malrotation and variable blood supply. In 1/3 of the cases of horseshoe kidney, the PUJ obstruction is seen where the pelvis and ureter are seen anteriorly placed. The obstruction can be either unilateral or bilateral. The obstruction is because of either the congenital stricture or high insertion of the ureter or abnormal ureteral course over the isthmus, either crossing vessels or maybe because of the abnormal UPJ motility. So usually most commonly seen in older
The
children.
computer screen is not seen. The laptop screen is not seen.
Share ಆಗಿದೆ.
At least I am not seeing. I don't know.
Sir, 1 minute, sir.
Stop share.
ಇಲ್ಲಿದೆ. Sure. Close this.
Stop share. Share.
So can you see now, sir?
Slide.
Go ahead. I can see now.
Yes, sir. So most commonly seen in older children with urinary tract infection or calculus, renal calculus. So the technical challenge in horseshoe kidney is the crossing vessels and unfamiliar position of the kidney. So the most commonly used approaches are, in case of unilateral horseshoe kidney with obstruction, horseshoe kidney with unilateral obstruction, flank position is used. And in case of bilateral obstruction, transperitoneal, either vertical or transverse incisions are used. The most common technique used are dismembered pyeloplasty. And a few other surgeons, there are studies which are showing pyeloplasty with ischemectomy and lateropexy of the kidneys. When in case of crossing vessels with normal ureter with a small pelvis, which is not feasible for dismembered pyeloplasty, where we do Hellstrom technique, where these crossing vessels are mobilized and fixed caudally to prevent the obstruction. Ischemectomy is not advised in case of obstruction with uh, horseshoe kidney, because of the variable blood supply to the kidneys, which can cause ischemia. Coming to complications of pyeloplasty, the acute complications, the post-operative pyelonephritis is most common when there is a intraoperative urine culture is positive. So these cases are treated with IV antibiotics. The delayed opening of the uretropelvic junction anastomosis because of the edema. So these cases will present with prolonged leak at anastomosis. So these cases can be sent home with the tube, and when there is a decrease in the output, then we can remove the tube. The late complications are like failed pyeloplasty, which are manifested as clinical symptoms, or the on USG there will be progressively worsening of the APD diameter. So the initially optimize drainage via nephrostomy or ureteral stent, but the surgical intervention is usually not considered before 2 months of the pyeloplasty. So the options available for failed pyeloplasty are the revision pyeloplasty or ureterochalicostomy, endopylotomy, laparoscopy, or when there is a decrease in function, then we can go ahead with nephrectomy. Coming to follow-up, usually first follow-up is done at 3 months with the USG, and at 6 months and 1 yearly, followed by annually. Usually these cases are usually followed up till 15 years. In USG, usually we see for the increase in the parenchymal thickness and increase in the axial length of the kidneys. And usually this diuretic scintigraphy are done at 1 year to see for the improvement in the function. Coming to outcome, the successful pyeloplasties are done, which shows there will be preservation or there will be improvement of the renal function. The early detection and surgery is done before the renal impairment is very important. Atraumatic tissue handling, careful dissection, preservation of the ureteral blood supply, and tension-free anastomosis is very important in case of pyeloplasty. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Vinay.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, it's open for discussion now. Ramchandra sir.
No, you didn't say anything about what you do when there is a recurrent obstruction. How do you investigate, and what is the operative approach to a redo pyeloplasty? What is the incidence of failure of pyeloplasty, and what is the operative approach to a redo pyeloplasty?
So
that itself is a question in the exam, and it's also an important point in your career as a pediatric urologist. You must be knowing how do you approach when you're suspecting that this is a failed pyeloplasty. How do you approach, and what are you going to do?
so studies have shown the dismembered pyeloplasty success rate is around 98%, sir. It again depends on the skill of the surgeon, introp handling of the tissues, and anastomosis, anastomosis of the ureter to the pelvis, and dependent drainage is very important in case of pyeloplasty, sir.
Okay.
Usually this followed up with ultrasonography.
That you mentioned, no, everything you mentioned.
Sir.
When you are suspecting, and when it is showing, investigation is showing to you that there is a possibility of a failed pyeloplasty in this patient.
There will
How do
be
you confirm?
there will be
decreased
there will be
function,
sir.
decreased
There will
function and continuing obstruction, isn't it?
sir. There will
Yeah.
be in after 3 months. What we do, the USG is taken as the basal APD, basal APD. Then when there is an increase in the APD diameter and a decrease in the renal function in scintigraphic studies, and we
Normally,
have to
when do you do a follow up isotopenography?
sir.
When do you do it normally?
Sir, usually initially we have to go ahead with ultrasonography, sir. When we are in doubt, we can do as early as 6 months, sir.
Okay. Sometimes even 6 weeks to 3 months also you may be, you may feel like doing a isotopenography, especially if, as you said, the parenchyma is appearing to be thinning and your dilatation is increasing, and patient is developing other symptoms. What symptoms will the patient develop?
Urinary tract infections.
Yes, urinary tract infection is a very important indicator that there's something going wrong.
And
And a
hypertension
little,
also.
little more time frame, little more longer time frame. What will be an indication for failed
Hypertension, sir.
pyeloplasty? Hypertension is not usually that much because generally not seen.
Parenchymal thickness.
Parenchymal
Calculi.
thickness is fine.
Calculi.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So that brings us to the next question. When you define a problem like a UPJO or a PUJ obstruction, you have to say precisely what is your primary goal of treatment. So what is your primary goal of treatment in PUJ obstruction?
Dependent drainage. To reduce.
Primary goal of treatment.
To relieve the obstruction, sir.
Primary goal.
To improvement of the renal function and to preserve.
Yes. Now you are talking. So primary goal of therapy of PUJ obstruction is to preserve or to improve the renal function. What are the secondary goals of treatment of PUJ obstruction? I'm telling specifically secondary goals, so I'm using plural. So what are the secondary goals?
So to prevent this urinary tract infections,
Yes,
growth,
very good. So what is it called? It's called as febrile UTI.
Febrile UTI.
Febrile UTI is bad for a child. Okay. What else?
The growth of the baby.
Okay. What else? When a PUJO presents to you in the say 5th year or 6th year of life for the first time, what will be the major symptom?
So pain, they present with pain abdomen.
Pain abdomen. See, now you are talking. So you have to think logically. So another secondary goal of treatment is to relieve pain if it is the presenting symptom.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Also, there will be the primary goal which will be running concurrently with your treatment. Okay. Primary goal is to preserve renal function or to improve the renal function. Okay.
Yes, sir.
What is the next one? One more is there. Secondary goal.
Sir, no. No
You
idea.
told no just now. To prevent stone formation.
Okay.
Stasis and stone formation. And some people say even hematuria can be a presentation.
Yes.
But generally, if you say febrile UTI, pain, which is a colicky pain, what is it due to commonly? Colicky pain is due to what?
Sir,
It's an
Dieter's crisis.
Dieter's crisis. Yes, very good. Okay, so this entire topic of failed pyeloplasty and what do you do for a redo procedure? How do you approach it? What are your surgical strategies? All those things you must mention.
Yes.
Okay, so briefly, can you mention? Do you know? Can you think of?
Sir, as for failed approach, there are different techniques are ureterocalicostomy or anterior intraperitoneal approach.
Yes, yes. No,
Yes.
those are all operative approaches.
Yes.
When you are investigating, what do you do? See, generally a failed pyeloplasty will give you an indication that the function is deteriorating.
Yes.
So when the function is deteriorating, what do you do?
So can we go ahead with initial DJ stenting and nephrostomy?
Yes, you can do that if you are
Yes.
a good endoscopic urologist. You can probably do a DJ stent, but DJ stent may not go through because that is the reason why the pyeloplasty has failed. There may be a stenosis or a stricture at the PUJO.
Yes.
So your guide wire may not slip through, or your stent may not go, even if your guide wire goes through. Okay.
Yes. Yes, sir.
So yes, you can. If you are a very good endoscopist, you can try DJ stenting, and you can also do a nephrostomy.
Nephrostomy.
While you are waiting for getting the child scheduled. Suppose the child has a UTI, or the child has a URTI or an LRTI or something like that, and the parents need time to get the decision going. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So you can do either a DJ stent or you can do a nephrostomy. Most commonly, you will be doing a nephrostomy.
Yes.
DJ stent is tough to do. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Then when you're operating, normally you need to know what has happened to the ureter and all that. So normally you need to do a dye study.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you need to combine the nephrostomy and the retrograde study
RGP.
to find out exactly what is happening at the PU junction. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So these are very rationally, strategically you have to approach this, and then you decide what you need to do. But in 90%, I mean, majority of the patient, 99% of the cases, your earlier surgery only you can repeat. That is, if you have done an Anderson-Heinz, you can go ahead and do an Anderson-Heinz this time also. So this time, after you do the surgery, in addition to the stent, you may also need to continue with the nephrostomy, because you need to study the anastomosis properly before you remove the stent and clamp the nephrostomy. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Ureterocalicostomy is very, very rarely done. It's a very nice procedure which gives excellent results. So it has to be kept in mind.
Okay, sir. Yes, sir.
Most common is a redo Anderson-Heinz
Anderson.
pyeloplasty.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, right. Okay. Thank you.
Sir, one doubt, sir.
Yeah, tell me.
Sir, what is the role of RGP in preoperatively before pyeloplasty? In books they have mentioned RGP, but we are not doing regularly.
Yeah. That was the practice followed by adult surgeons when they were doing pyeloplasty in older people, like adults, adolescents, and older children. It is generally not done by pediatric surgeons because we don't feel the necessity for that. And also, initially we did not have the scopes and the equipment to do a RGP in small child. In infant, you could not do an RGP earlier. So it was just not possible to do it. So you would not do it. Okay. So now instruments are there, but just because instruments are there, it is not necessary to do it, because we have found that there is nothing you miss by not doing it.
Okay, sir.
Okay. So
Yes, sir.
most of our pyeloplasties are in a young child, either in an infant or around 1 or 2 years of age. So we don't need to do a retrograde study. Retrograde study is required only when there is an anatomical novelty, like a horseshoe kidney
Yes.
or like a Duplex system, or you are going in for a redo pyeloplasty. So that is where retrograde study is required, when you need to delineate the anatomy.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, Vinay, we'll end the session.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.